And we are live. Good morning to all the wonderful people who tuned in at 8:30 in the morning, Central Standard Time here in the United States. I hope you are doing well, and I'm glad that we managed to get through all the advertised super events that were supposed to happen yesterday here, at least in America, without much happening. That was a relief, I will say, even though I wasn't that worried. With me today is Gene Zanetti. Did I pronounce your last name right, by the way? I'm terrible with names. Okay, good. Oh, Spiritual Strength Catholic. There should be a link in the description box of this video. Go check the channel out. You do more of a sort of the spiritual side of the Catholic faith, though, the part that people should actually be focused on most of the time, more so than the news side like I do. But we're going to talk today about Fatima, and not just the typical sort of message of Fatima kind of video you see a lot of people do. You messaged me some time ago pointing out that there was something that it was discussed at an actual council of the church that kind of upends the idea that we don't actually have to believe Marian apparitions if we don't want to. That we've been told this. I don't know if that's actually, if that's just a post-conciliar idea or if this is something that goes back further. But you found something that challenges that idea and challenges it on very strong ground. So why don't you tell us what it is you found, and kind of let's start talking about the implications of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So the 18th Ecumenical Council was Lateran V, which took place from 1512 to 1517. It was convoked by Pope Julius II, and it was continued by Pope Leo X after his death. And in the 11th session in 1516, there was actually a document on how to preach. It was about the preaching of the priests, and then what they need to, basically what they need to do, what they need to avoid. So on their end, it comes down to, they said it needs to be focused on the gospel. And apparently there was a lot of priests preaching about false miracles and false prophets and false prophecies, predicting the exact date of the end of the world and things like that. So it goes on speaking about that. And then after that, it goes into, well, this by no means has anything to do with authentic prophecy. So I could read this part to you. This was excellent. It says, but if the Lord reveals to certain of them by some inspiration some future events in the church of God, as he promises by the prophet Amos, and as the apostle Paul, the chief of preachers, says, do not quench the spirit, do not despise prophesying, for we have no wish for them to be counted with the other group of storytellers and liars, or to be otherwise hindered. For as Ambrose bears witness, the grace of the Spirit himself is being extinguished if fervor in those beginning to speak is quieted by contradiction. In this case, a wrong is certainly done to the Holy Spirit. So it's do not quench the spirit, do not despise prophesying. Don't group the false miracles and the false prophets in with the authentic prophets, those who actually have been given some revelation by God, even if that's private revelation.
So I'm going to go right into just jumping in feet first into controversy here. There's a lot of fans of Medjugorje out there, even though the local ordinary, who is the only person who had any real authority to make the ruling, said no on Medjugorje multiple times. Yet, for whatever reason, people ignored him. You see this also, Bayside, for whatever reason, still lingers. I sometimes get trigger people in my comments when I say, yeah, Bayside's obviously fraud. How did anybody fall for that? The idea of lumping Fatima in with Medjugorje, Bayside, and other things, and then saying, well, I don't have to believe those, so I don't have to believe Fatima, despite that there were conservatively 70,000 witnesses to the miracle of the sun and the messages of Fatima so far having been proven to be true, just the revealed messages. Because I don't know if you share my skepticism or not, but I'm very skeptical of what we even got in 2005, the public revealed message of the third secret. I, at the very least, think it's incomplete. If not, the whole thing was not even the real message, just from what prelates have said over the years about what the third secret contained, which appears, according to a few of the cardinals, Cardinal Chappie, I think, was one who said it was involved an apostasy in the church led from the top. That's what several of these prelates had said. That lumping those Fatima in with unapproved apparitions and others is a grave disservice. And to say that you don't have to actually believe Fatima, I think that's actually extremely dangerous. And it seems like the church at Lateran V was saying that you actually, if it's approved by the church and is of sufficiently public nature, you actually do have a duty to believe it.
Right. Otherwise, you're doing harm to the Holy Spirit, you're quenching the Spirit, and you're denying that there would continue to be prophets. God would continue to send prophets, not to reveal new public revelation, but for the purpose of directing our actions. And St. Thomas speaks about that in the Summa. And in fact, the very next part of Lateran V, after what I just read, was that the council said that from now on, the Apostolic See must approve of any of these. It must be submitted to the Apostolic See to approve of these private revelations.
Mm.
But here is the interesting thing. It says, if it's impossible to do this without delay of danger, or some pressing need suggests other actions, then keeping the same arrangement, notices to be given to the local ordinary. And basically, it lays now on their conscience to approve of this. So the Holy See is the Fifth Lateran Council is making a provision that in case a private revelation, a prophecy is so demanding, like this needs to happen right now, and action needs to be taken right now, it can transfer from the Holy See to the local ordinary. So the council's making a provision. This could happen. This could very well happen, that a message could come from heaven that needs to be acted on right now. And there's a way to deal with that.
Right. And maybe we can take the sensational thanks for the super sticker, Michael Scott. It is appreciated. I would say maybe we can take the sensational aspect of Fatima out of this for a second. Instead, let's transpose Lourdes in. Lourdes is also extremely public in nature, not because of messages about the future state of the church associated, but because how many hundreds of miracles of healing have happened at Lourdes. And yet for somebody to say they don't believe Lourdes or anything that happens there is real, we would kind of laugh at that as pious Catholics, or at least seemingly trying to be pious Catholics, because it's not that difficult to find a living person who had some horrible malady. They visited Lourdes and the malady went away. Even if the church never formally acknowledged what their experience, we've actually encountered people, many of us have, I have encountered people who have had blindness or severe traumas or whatever cured at Lourdes. And we would kind of laugh at anybody who would say, or at least disagree strongly and wonder about them if they denied the miracles and the events at Lourdes. But as soon as you say Fatima, because Fatima is unfortunately political, there are people who say, why do we still talk about Fatima? Consecration was done decades ago, or a couple years ago, depending on, which version you want to go with. And obviously we now live in the Marian age of peace. I can't say that with a straight face, by the way, but there are people who will tell you that it's all done and everything is fine now. And so why does Fatima keep coming up then? Especially in light of what we're talking about, what seems to be the required to believe this, according to Lateran V, a council that most people have forgotten about.
If Fatima is not approved by the church, there's no apparition that's approved by the church. With the amount of ecclesiastical approbation, approval of the apparition is worthy of belief. There's been 14 consecration attempts. How many popes have visited Fatima? How many homilies from the Pope have referenced Fatima? The canonization of Jacinta and Francisco, Sister Lucia being the servant of God. Fatima was added to the new Roman Missal as a date. John Paul II saying Fatima imposes an obligation on the faithful. Benedict in 2010 saying that Fatima is more relevant now than ever before. I don't think popes have spoken about any private revelation or prophecy nearly as much as Fatima. So Fatima is really a whole entire different category than even approved apparitions, in my opinion.
Mm. This is, as I was telling you before we went live, Fatima is my sort of measuring stick for other Marian apparitions, including ones that I've covered that were quasi-approved, sort of on that borderline between formal Vatican approval, or the Vatican might still be just sitting on its hands about it and hasn't ruled one way or another. If the message of any Marian apparition can be judged by what is said at Fatima, and of course the apparitions leading up to Fatima. So for instance, Our Lady of Good Success, which I've done numerous videos on, this stupid political debate about her name, you could take the message from that and what we know of Fatima, and they line up perfectly fine. There's no conflict whatsoever. The same with Akita. Even the more peaceful apparitions, there's always a call to prayer and penance. Marian apparitions are always come with a call for prayer and penance. And never do they come with a message that, well, most people go to purgatory now. Everything's fine. So I have somebody here in the chat who's asking about a Marian apparition in the 60s in Egypt. I don't really know anything about that Marian apparition per se. Is that the one with where Our Lady appeared to not just Catholics, but to we'll say the predominant religious group in in that part of the world, and is often associated with the conversions of members of that group? Is that actually what we're talking about here? Let me know in the chat, because I'm very curious. I don't know much about that one. What I do know is, again, you can judge anything, pretty much any mystic, anybody with a prophetic message against the message of Fatima. And if there's a conflict, it's probably wise to err on the side of the message of Fatima.
Right. Well, with the miracle of the sun, we just had the anniversary of yesterday. Over 70,000 people watching the sun dance in the sky, hurling towards the earth. People were yelling, screaming, and crying. People were actually confessing their sins out loud. I mean, can you believe that? Imagine that. And so this was God's public and unequivocal stamp of approval on the message that these three shepherd children were bringing to the authorities. So, again, there's theologians that have called this public prophetic revelation, which is in its complete separate category. But yeah, exactly like you said, Anthony, you could certainly measure any other private revelation in light of Fatima. Does it line up? Mm-hmm. It has such strong ecclesiastical approval, and the largest public miracle since the parting of the Red Sea.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't think of anything that happened even close to the scale of Fatima, with the number of witnesses or the impact it's had on the church and even people outside the church. Fatima had an enormous implications for even the stonecutter authorities in Portugal. They tried everything. They did everything in their power to squash that message from happening. Everything. And I actually think that that's part of the reason why, I again caused a stir when I said I did not like the Fatima movie that came out a couple of years ago. It was probably the most watered down depiction of the story of Fatima, including the message of Fatima, that I could have ever imagined. I don't remember a single mention of the rosary in the movie, for example, especially not in the prayer rosary part of the message. The depiction of souls falling like snowflakes, that was bad, just laughably bad. In fact, I don't think I saw that many souls falling like snowflakes in their vision. It's like every attempt by the world has been made to either water down or wipe away the message of Fatima. And I think there's been a real attempt to get people to accept the idea that you don't actually have to necessarily believe it either. Now, granted, for 1900 years, Catholics had never heard of Fatima unless they lived within, in or near the little town we're talking about. And you didn't, if you hold the faith, you'll probably be okay. But I can't understand why anybody would object to or not take seriously the message of Fatima. I say this as someone who occasionally tells people don't make, prophecies and apparition chasing and all that. You're sort of like the core of your faith. That's actually a really dangerous thing to do. But take it seriously. Take the messages seriously. Live the messages, meaning pray the rosary, pray the little office, get enrolled in the brown scapular, actually get enrolled, not just wear it, but actually get enrolled. And, try to live the Fatima message, wrestle with those sins, go to confession more often, those kinds of things.
Right. And we know that God will continue to send prophets. And Lateran V is making it very, very clear that this is coming from the Holy See. This is coming from Rome, an ecumenical council saying that this will happen. God will send us prophets, and that's not to be categorized with the fakers. So, yeah, and there's always, when people look at Fatima, people will look at, well, a lot of times it gets watered down because they focus on the devotional side of what we do. So there's a private side and a social side. And the private side is what we need to do to get to heaven, saving our soul. If we follow the message of Fatima, we will indeed save our soul. But Fatima is not simply limited to saving our own soul. It's also it's a key to unlock a certain door. The world will be punished until X is done. And what do we need to do on our end? A lot of people focus so much on the Pope and the bishops, and yes, they have their role, but we merit the grace for the Pope. And this is what people miss. The faithful merit the grace for the Pope to do what he needs to do. So what do we need to do? That's the social side of this devotion. And that's consecrate ourselves to Mary, pray the rosary, offer up our sufferings and daily duty.
The
Saturdays,
the five first Saturdays.
scapular.
I want to mention that, by the way. Have you ever noticed a first Saturday mass is nearly impossible to find? Unless you go to a traditional parish, you're not going to find it. I have seen maybe one ordinary form parish my entire life that offered that, and that was in the Archdiocese of Portland. I haven't really looked since I moved cross country, but I haven't seen one since then. And it's otherwise but any traditional parish I've ever seen offers it. Diocesan, SSPX, anything in between.
And not only that, it's always a bad day on your schedule. If you notice that the first Saturday of the month, something's always going on. It's always something you have to cram in and make some kind of sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what the devil wants. He's going to throw everything he can at the world so people don't know about the brown scapular, much less wear it and are enrolled in it. So all of those 5 Fatima conditions that are mandatory for us to fulfill the Fatima message. So the Pope, we merit the grace for the Pope to do what he needs to do. The devil's going to throw everything he can at us so that doesn't happen. So certainly finding a mass would fall into that category.
Right. There is somebody in the chat does point out something useful about the first Saturdays, by the way. Virtually all of the conditions for the first Saturday mass can be done up to 8 days beforehand. People tend to forget that. That's the receiving of the Eucharist, the meditation on the mysteries of the Rosary. I've heard different debates on what that actually means, by the way. Some people would spend 15 minutes at 1 minute per mystery on that first Saturday, or they do, I guess, they meditate on one mystery for the 15 minutes, whatever. But I think it's more the action that's more important and the meditation as opposed to the particulars on how you do it. But you can actually fulfill most of those, including the receiving the Eucharist, going to confession, all those things. But the mass availability itself is hard. And you're absolutely right. There were a number of, I had to start the 5 first Saturdays over a couple of times before we finally managed to do 5 consecutive masses, and meaning 5 consecutive first Saturday masses. Now I can't even imagine how hard it would be if you're trying to do first Fridays and first Saturdays at the same time, because some people do that. Of course, somebody in the chat inevitably will say, well, my local church offers a first Saturday in Missouri. Well, good.
Great.
I am one of those who says, who doesn't think that you should just go to a, Saturday vigil mass that's not actually offered for the intention of the first Saturday and try to use it for the first Saturday. I know that's not in there, but again, when the first Saturday, 5 first Saturdays devotion was requested, there was no such thing as a vigil mass the night before. That just didn't exist. So that's why the church has never said anything one way or the other about it. I would go for let me put it this way. Any first Saturday mass I've ever gone to, the priest was offering the mass for the intentions of reparations in line with the 5 first Saturdays devotion. And that's how I personally would do it.
Right.
Where Raven Ray says where he lives, 2 churches, an SSPX one and an Ecclesia Day, have first Saturday evening TLM with overnight Eucharistic vigil, followed by first Saturday dawn or morning TLM. Wow. So first Friday and then first Saturday. Well, I mean, that's for the really hardcore if you have the ability to do that. Those with children may have a hard time taking part in both of those, but that's really cool that you have that option. Not everybody definitely has that. Flying Tigers says his traditionalist pastor permits him to receive communion at the Tridentine Mass early the next morning on Sunday. This is for the explicit intention of fulfilling the 5 first Saturdays devotion. Yes, and that's perfectly licit. There's, again, within 8 days. I've done numerous videos on this before. I really should do another 5 first Saturdays devotion video, because one of the reasons I started my channel was to just periodically throw out there the go do the 5 first Saturdays. But you have to be careful doing the same video type over and over again on YouTube. So,
but once a month isn't that much to ask for. And that's what we've been pushing with Spiritual Strength, trying to connect the different Catholic apostolates out there and saying, look, just once a month, everyone needs to be on the same page, at least a little bit. Mm-hmm. Again, going back to Lateran V, an ecumenical council is saying that prophecies will continue to happen and they need to be acted on. So if we don't keep pushing this button, you know how it is in marketing. If we say it once, it gets lost. It needs to be over and over and over, us and all the other Catholic apostolates, just once a month. And then we get back to all doing what we're doing.
including people who may not agree with us on much of anything else.
That's fine.
I appeared on a live stream with a much more liberal Catholic than I was like last week, and our conversation was surprisingly amiable on most things. Because when you have the faith, when both people have the faith, then the ecclesiastical differences should be able to be talked about in ways without devolving into madness and chaos. And this is one of those areas where even if you believe the consecration was done properly, the idea that you shouldn't go keep the 5 first Saturdays and do reparation, that when you really think about it, I mean, all you have to do is spend 10 minutes on Facebook in Catholic groups, and inevitably you'll see a post from somebody who sharing, some blasphemy or, insult to Our Lady into the group for people to make reparation for. So again, this shouldn't be controversial. This should be the
No,
kind of thing we should be able to reach across individual lines. In fact, maybe this is a way to heal the great divide in the church in some way.
I think it's the only way. I mean, Our Lady says only she can save us. People aren't going to be united on topics like the Latin Mass and Vatican II, much less things like the consecration of that country, a fake Sister Lucia, the third secret. That stuff. I think the devil uses a lot of that to tear us apart. Now, certainly there's an objective reality of what is in every one of those situations, but the devil uses us to focus on those issues at the expense of doing exactly what we need to do. And we know a certain critical number needs to be reached. Who knows how close we are? Who knows how far we are? But people aren't doing it. How many people are wearing the brown scapular? Not many. Not many. Sister Lucia says you have to wear the brown scapular to be living the Fatima message and everything. That's why we use that helpful acronym CROSS. Consecrate ourselves to Mary, rosary daily, offer up our sufferings and daily duty, scapular, and Saturdays, the first Saturday devotion. Everyone needs to do that, and not enough people are doing it. So we need to sound the alarm, because whether or not the consecration was fulfilled, we haven't had the triumph yet. Catholics can agree that the triumph of Mary has not happened, and it's clear that has not happened because not enough people are doing what she told us to do.
I have been told by people with a straight face that the fall of the Iron Curtain was the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. Things are worse now than they were at in that phase of modern history. Now, Ginger asks in the chat, how do you enroll in the brown scapular? At least at my traditional parish, the priest will offer just to enroll anybody who wants to be enrolled, usually at the Sunday Mass closest to the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. You can get enrolled outside of that by asking your priest. They should all have a priest's book with the various different approved blessings and rituals in it to do that. I would go find a good sturdy version of the brown scapular. I've had the same brown scapular for like 5 years actually, and I never take it off. I'm one of those don't take it off ever kind of people. And it's in as nearly as good a shape as it was as 5 years ago. And I bought mine on Etsy. I would need to go find that seller now, because as I understand it, Etsy is been largely abandoned by people because Etsy has gotten really bad about its commercialism. But mine is a remarkably strong one, but the comes with some responsibilities. This is where people get into the Sabbatine privilege versus the everything else. And the Sabbatine privilege says that basically most of the requirements of the brown scapular can be fulfilled by just the daily recitation of the rosary, and that was ruled on by the church. Now, the controversial opinion I have about this is that when Sister Lucia was saying you live the message of Fatima, it requires you to wear the brown scapular, but also to pray the little office. And I don't think that's covered by the Sabbatine privilege. And the reason I always err on the side of more prayer on this. And the little office is actually not that hard to do. It really isn't. It's just being required to set aside 6 or 7 or times of your day to pray for about 2 or 3 minutes, except for when you're doing Vespers and Matins and Lauds, which are the longer prayers. Flying Tigers with a very nice super chat. Thank you very much. It is appreciated. He says that Malachi Martin said the lady had a very strong responsibility to Our Lady to practice the 5 first Saturdays devotions in completely fulfilling her request. And he is 100% correct. In fact, you could almost make a line of these priests in the modern history of the church who championed the Fatima message and trying to get the laity to go do the 5 first Saturdays. And you and I spoke on this channel a year and a half ago about another priest who was before Malachi Martin, back when Father Martin would have been either in seminary or in his early part of his priesthood, when he was not known to the public at all. in the 1950s. What was that priest's name? He was trying to get more Catholics to be enrolled in the brown scapular and to pray the little office. And he had a fascinating story about his face-to-face meeting with Sister Lucia.
Father Rafferty.
Yes, yes. Why don't you go ahead and why don't you tell us a little bit about Father Rafferty again, for those who are not familiar with him?
Right. So he's the one who interviewed Sister Lucia, who was able to get the famous quote from Sister Lucia: "The rosary and the scapular are inseparable." Everyone's heard that. That's from Father Howard Rafferty. And we actually have a great interview on our page with that. I think we sent that to you. You might have posted it also, where this is where Sister Lucia said clear as day that if you are not wearing the brown scapular, you are not living the Fatima message. And she went on to list all 5 conditions that Catholics need to fulfill. And that, again, is the acronym CROSS: consecrate yourself to Mary, rosary daily, offer up sufferings and daily duties, scapular, and Saturdays, the first Saturday devotion. So they met in 1950, and Sister Lucia was very clear in what our mission was, what the direction we needed to take.
Yes, and part of that was, of course, key to it was the getting and making sure that you were enrolled in the brown scapular, because it is key to living the Fatima message. And at least in my mind, more prayer is never a bad thing. So get a good copy of the little office. And here's where my own ecclesiastical politics will come in. I suggest strongly a 1962 or earlier one. I have in a pinch found the more recent 1990s, 2000s translations, and the translations leave something to be desired. We'll say a lot of times there's prayers or some of the Psalms have been omitted. You're basically, with the little office, you're praying the Psalms. Mostly you're praying the Psalms and a few other prayers that are in there. And it changes a little bit by the liturgical season. So some of the prayers are changed depending if it's Advent or the period between Candlemas and Lent or whatever. My family uses the Angelus Press 1962 one. You can find it online for free. I recommend just buying a copy. In fact, probably buy extras, because after about a year, the book starts to fall apart because you're handling the book at least 5 times a day. And you pray Matins Lauds, which typically Matins and Lauds is prayed at midnight, but really in practice, it's when you get up in the morning, you pray Matins and Lauds. And then at about 6 a.m., you would do Prime, and then you do Terrace at about 9 a.m. and on and on and on through the day. You can lump hours in together if you need to. The important part is the actual praying of the office, as long as you're not doing all of your hours at one time in the day, right? This is they call it the little office because the breviary is the office, the official public prayer of the church. And the reason I emphasize people not praying all the hours at one time is one of the things you hear sometimes is, one of the critiques of the pre-conciliar church was that it got to the point where priests were praying their entire office every single day, all in one sitting at the end of their day. Right. So try to make the time to at least do your hours appropriately spaced each day. It sounds like a lot. It's not. My wife and I do the little office every single day.
Right. And for people who get overwhelmed, there's a 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. The goal is to get that Sabbatine privilege. So you are praying that the little office every day, observing chastity according to your state of life, wearing the brown scapular while being enrolled. Step 1, get a scapular around your neck. Wear the brown scapular, everyone out there. I'm at a point where now myself and a group of us with spiritual strength, we just purchased 900 scapulars. We keep them in the trunk of our car. We're handing them out like candy at the gas station, everywhere. And then you never mind giving them away when I do speaking engagements and everything. So get the brown scapular around your neck, and then don't keep it in the priest's hands. And get the enrollment on your phone. And then when you see a priest, put that in front of them so he could enroll you on the spot. So there's no guesswork, taking everything out of the equation, and then work yourself towards praying that little office. Because if you get that Sabbatine privilege, the Blessed Mother promises on the Saturday after your death, she'll come in and scoop you out of purgatory if you're there. I mean, how motherly is that? Mm-hmm. So what does that tell you? That tells you that no soul should spend more than 6 days in purgatory. The girl Amelia at Fatima, who they said would be in purgatory until the end of time, there's one thing you can guarantee. She did not do what she needed to do to get the Sabbatine privilege. Otherwise, she would not be in purgatory until the end of time. No one should spend more than 6 days in purgatory if they're fulfilling the obligations for the Sabbatine privilege.
Correct. And this is, of course, the obligations for the Sabbatine privilege are we should probably talk about that a little bit here. What are some of the what are the obligations of the Sabbatine privilege?
Wear the brown scapular and be enrolled in it. 2, observe chastity according to your state of life. And 3, pray the little office of the Blessed Virgin.
Yes. So here's your problem. Here's where you're going to now here's where most people are going to run into problems. That's going to be point 2. It's not the most dangerous of sins, but it seems to be the biggest trap for sins, especially in this culture where impurity is practically used to sell children's products now. A lot of Catholics hate Halloween. I'm not going to get into that rather painful debate that happens every year. I will just suggest that if you're in the grocery store or a Walmart and you see some of those costumes that look for girls that look a little impure or immodest, remember, a lot of those are marketed to kids now. And that's not just at Halloween, it's year round in the clothing section. And if you're a parent, you know this. You've walked to the store before and probably had the internal debate on wondering how hard it would be to learn how to sew your own clothing. To just essentially become almost Mennonite in your relationship to material goods in the world. That's where the biggest trap is going to be. So if you are like 90% of Catholic men and 80% of Catholic women, from what I have heard priests who preach on confession talk about, they will bluntly tell you that 80% of women have problems with impurity and that garbage you find on the internet. That's the women. It's 90% of men. The one place I've ever disagreed really fundamentally with Father Ripperger is where he makes it sound like it's worse among traditional Catholics. But those of us who try to keep our feet at least in the Novus Ordo world will say that the reason you don't hear as much about it there is because a lot of we have all encountered the older 1960s priest who says, "Oh, it's not that big a deal. Go receive communion. Just say an act of reparation." Because it's a habitual problem, it's not that big a deal.
It's a war. Chastity is a war that all of us have to fight, and that's why we have to. And this is one of those wars that you don't fight, you flee, right? All the church, the great teachers of the church have said a lot of times you engage a battle against certain sin, but not for chastity. You run the other way, and that's what we have to pray to the Blessed Mother, Virgin Most Chaste, Saint Maria Goretti. It's a grace that we need, and then it starts with custody of the eyes and custody of the heart. It begins what's going on internally. So the first sight, you have your best chance at beating a temptation in the first moment. So at the first possible moment of recognition, run the other way. And the Desert Fathers also spoke about gluttony tends to be related to lust. So if we could control ourselves in relation to food to a better extent, that's why it's good to follow the fasting, the old fasting and abstinence laws of the church, including the Ember Days and the vigils and so on. So we develop that virtue. If we practice that self-control with food, it'll likely lead to that self-control with sex. And if you find yourself in a bad way, call a friend. That's why even Alcoholics Anonymous, they'll say, make sure you have a sponsor, have a buddy that you could talk to. And if it gets that bad, you get flat on the ground and you pray to God the Father for help. That's what you need to do. It's not a joke. It's a battle. Don't get discouraged. It might take time to beat this, and it's never beat completely. So just stay the course.
So for a tutorial on how to do this, I mean, it's what's the old saying? It's do the red, say the black, right? So again, it's based on the liturgical season, and there are certain prayers that you will do, like you'll in the little office, you'll start in matins, you'll just do what the prayers it tells you to do, and then you'll get to a point in the book where it'll say, okay, Mondays, Tuesdays, or whatever day of the week, you go to this page and you do this, and you just keep going down and do the prayers. It's not one of those things I don't think can be that hard. It's not that I figured out how to do it without any instruction. So I actually have a hard time understanding where people find a problem with this being difficult, because I don't have my copy right at my desk right now. Otherwise I would just do it and show people as best I can with my garbage tier camera that I have. But matins is done at traditionally, if you want to go hardcore mode, you go to bed, you wake up at about 11:45 at night, you do matins, you go back to bed, wake at about 2:50. At 3:00 you do lauds, and then you go back to bed and you get up at just before 6 and you do prime, and you go about your day. And then at 9:00, regardless of what you're doing, you do terce, and then repeat at noon for sext, and then repeat at 3:00 for known, which by the way is the root for noon. I don't know why how known the 3 p.m. hours, that word became our word for 12 o'clock, but whatever. And then, you have Vespers at 6, which is to be differentiated from the most hilariously silly thing I've ever seen, which was a Lutheran parish in downtown Portland advertised that every night they had something called Jazz Vespers, which I'm not sure what that is. But Vespers is like the longest of the hours, individual hours. And then after that, you have Compline, which would be 9 p.m. ish. Now, you don't have to go ultra hardcore. You can do matins and lauds after you've woken up and are awake enough to actually not just robot your way through it. And then you do, the rest of the hours at their appointed time, or if need be, combine them because life happens. The prayers and keeping of the discipline is the most important part. More important so than, I think, than the actual rigid part of the schedule. But again, people are free to disagree with me on that. But you have to pay attention because there'll be red text that will tell you, this next part is for Advent, or this next part is for the Easter season.
Yeah, and I heard it could be transmitted to the Rosary, the little office. I don't know, but remember we were going back and forth. We don't know what the story with that is officially. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you don't need to be doing this to get to fulfill the message of Fatima. So that's, again, when you talk about the social side versus the private side, as far as the Sabbatine privilege, we're speaking about the private side of these devotions, the social side of what we need to do, the key that unlocks the door for the end of the crisis and the triumph of Mary. They're not necessarily the same thing. Just because we don't want the viewers to get discouraged, like, I can't do that, I can't wake up in the middle of the night, I can't live the Fatima message. They throw their hands up in the air. Now they're not wearing the brown scapular and all that. So we just want to be clear with them with that.
Mm-hmm. Again, I do recommend a preconciliar one, but that's usually my go-to thing anyway. That's why I do preconciliar papal writings and the writings of saints from before the council. But also the translation just is more coherent and it feels less dumbed down, because that's one thing that struck me is that the language is so simplified that it almost feels insulting. Like there's something being lost, a reverence being lost. Whereas the 1962 and the earlier versions, there's a website that has a 1912 version, which has the language is even more formalized English, but it does lend to the reverence of what you're supposed to be doing, as opposed to making it almost just offhanded conversationally. Like, imagine if Gene and I were just having an adult beverage in a bar, that kind of language. It's strange comparatively. There is a Novus Ordo office, the Dominican church where I used to go once a week for morning NO mass. They proceed with NO morning office prayers in English. Yeah, but that's probably the actual breviary they're doing, the actual, which priests are required to offer. I don't remember how many of the hours they're required out of the office to do, which is separate from the little office, which is more for the laity. I have heard people ask me before, can you substitute the traditional breviary for the little office? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm always curious why a layperson is doing the traditional breviary. They're totally entitled to do it if they want to, and more power to you if you want. And if you feel called to it, that's your business. I just don't know what the if there's interchangeable. Like some people say, "Oh, I try to do both." I'm like, probably no reason to do both.
Well, and the reality is, a lot of priests do, when they enroll people, they transfer the commitment from the little office to the rosary. So I mean, that's what's being done in practice all over the place. So
I'm not for this substitution. I think more is better. My wife and I pray the rosary every day. Now, when you say the rosary, if you mean the full 15 decades of the rosary every day, then that's probably one thing. It used to be when the saints spoke of praying the rosary, they weren't talking about the 5-decade rosary. They referred to the 5 decades as the children's rosary. But that's what children were required to pray. That's where we are now compared to these saints, and frankly our betters from in past ages, is that what we call the rosary, they called the children's rosary. If you're talking about doing the full 15 decades, then I guess that's what we're talking about. But when it comes to living the Fatima message, I'm not convinced that the rosary is a good substitution for the little office. For the Sabbatine privilege, I mean, that was up to the Vatican decades ago made that ruling, and that was their business to do, and that was their right to do.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the living of the Fatima message itself, I err on the side of more prayer.
Oh, I mean, Pascal's wager. What do you stand to gain? What do you stand to lose by being a minimalist versus a maximalist? But I go back to that Father Howard Rafferty interview with Sister Lucia back in 1950, and they didn't mention anything about the Sabbatine privilege. That's not to say it's a bad thing. It's a great thing. That would just seem to fall more on the private side of the devotion. But as far as living that message of Fatima, again, we can't say it enough times. Go back to cross. This is what's required of us. Consecrate ourselves to Mary, rosary daily, offer up our sufferings and daily duties, scapular, wear the brown scapular, just wear the brown scapular. That's what Sister Lucia said. And then Saturday's first Saturday devotion. So, we just don't want people to get discouraged. We want them to follow that course of action.
To answer your MB80, your question, is it only prayed on the first Saturday? No, it's prayed every day. Every single day. There are instructions in, especially Matins is the one that tends to, I think it's Matins. It's either Matins or Lauds where the prayers are the most different depending on the day of the week. After that, it's pretty much the same every single day, all the way through Compline. But I believe it's Matins that has, prayers for Monday versus Tuesday and versus Wednesday in one section of it. It's a daily thing. Sharon says, more prayer is not bad. This is correct. The contemplative nuns of the world, they're not paying attention to what's going on in the church really beyond what they need to. They're spending their time praying and working. That's what they're doing.
Does anyone have questions about Lateran V? Because that's something that almost no one knows about, and that is of massive importance.
We had enough people join us after that discussion that maybe we should reiterate that just a little bit, like a quick version of Lateran V.
So in 1516, during the 18th Ecumenical Council, Lateran V, there was a section on how to preach. This is section 11, and it was basically about the council saying that there's a lot of priests right now that are preaching poorly. They should be preaching about the gospel, and instead they're speaking about false miracles and false prophecy, false private, and they need to get back to the gospel message. Okay, and then it goes on to say, this in no way should be confused with authentic prophecy that's been approved by the Apostolic See. And they said to group true prophecy, true private revelation. In other words, Fatima. This is a foresight. This is about things like Fatima. That if something like this were to happen, we should not quench the Spirit, and if we do so, this is a sin against the Holy Spirit, and this is not pleasing to God. And that the Lord always promised that there will always be prophets, not to give us new revelation, public revelation, but to direct our actions. So when a true prophet comes along that's approved by the church, and nothing's been approved more than Fatima as far as private revelation, we have an obligation to respond to that. And then further, a provision was made in this same council later on in that paragraph that if there's a prophecy that's so pressing that it needs to be acted on right now, that authority from the Holy See can be delegated to the local ordinary, to the bishop. So it's acknowledging that heaven could give us something that we need to do immediately. And that's exactly what Fatima is. It's almost like this Fifth Lateran Council was made for situations like Fatima. There's something we need to do immediately for the prevention of crisis and saving our souls and the souls of others in the world.
Right. And what that essentially means in practice is the whole point of like the title I gave this live stream and things, that is, there is this idea that we see promoted by people who maybe don't really want to take Fatima seriously, that, well, it's private revelation and we're not required to believe private revelation. And if we're talking about, say, the visions of Alois Erlmeyer, who had visions of a conflict that might be getting ready to start, honestly, or if we're talking about, I don't know, it really fundamentally more private Marian apparitions, like say Our Lady of Good Success, because of that happened behind closed doors, essentially, you can make the argument there. But with Fatima, it was so public in nature, and it came with very explicit instructions for the whole church, to then just dismiss it as private revelation and say that we don't need to believe it is, from our reading of Lateran V, a sin against the Holy Spirit, essentially. And if not a sin against the Holy Spirit, comes really close to that line.
Right. It's saying that you can't do that. So if a priest tells you, even a priest says to you that, oh, well, we don't, you can't preach about private revelation or don't talk about prophecy, you could say that was actually condemned, maybe not solemnly condemned, but it certainly was. When you read Lateran V, that opinion is squashed by an ecumenical council. And you can point back to that. People have to be aware of the 11th session of the Fifth Lateran Council.
Yeah. I've already got a link on my show notes at my website to like this stream and things, but I can easily go in and edit that post. If you want to message me here in a minute with some like good sources for people to read up on this,
sure,
like maybe just with a citation to the paragraphs of Lateran V, then we can get a link to that, and I'll put it up there for people to read. It's written in the typical ecclesiastical language, so it's not the lightest reading you'll ever get. This is not written in a manner like a modern Catholic apologetics book for trying to give people the basics of the faith. This is typically written for, by cardinals and bishops for other bishops and priests to read. So we'll get that for you. But this is, again, as Catherine says in the chat, we're talking about a pre-announced miracle. Okay. Our Lady said this, something is going to happen on this date, and people showed up, and something did happen on this date. And it was so massive that, as one other earlier comment said in the chat, 1 million people saw this. Like, you could see this far from Fatima. Geographically, many, many miles away, you could see what was going on over there. This is a little different than even a more modern Marian apparition that I find fascinating, especially the politics around it, is Our Lady of Revelation. If you're familiar with that one, it was unlike most Marian apparitions. This wasn't given to children. This was an apparition who appeared before an adult man who was actually kind of an enemy of the church. He had planned to remove Pius XII from the equation, we'll say, right? And he had a radical conversion, and he presented Pius XII later with what he was going to use to do the job. And he was there. He met John Paul II later on, and he came with a message that was very similar to Fatima. And the striking thing about this is there's one English language translation of his book, and I got a message from somebody in Italy saying that be careful of the English translation. It has been completely whitewashed, that they were working on a more honest translation. If you're watching this, if you're the one who messaged me, send me a message. I'd love to have an update on that, because the English translation of Our Lady of Revelation is very troubling, actually. It looks almost like an endorsement of things going on in the church now, which is evil if somebody has done that. Right. Paisley said people just want to hear the latest, basically the news in the church, but they don't want to do the penance. I think that's true. And I point to my, Sunday morning, Saturday morning educational videos as examples of that. Often it's, warnings from bishops and priests and saints telling you this is how you should live your life. And well, people don't want to hear that. If anybody else has any other questions, today my wife and I are having a birthday party for my 2 children whose 2nd and 5th birthdays were Thursday and yesterday, respectively. So we got to get ready for that here soon. So we'll be ending this shortly. So if anybody has any other questions in the chat, this is now the time to ask. And we'll try to have you on again. I haven't done live streams until recently, just because of the internet related things. And it looks like for now anyway, it can work, especially with flexibility of time. People wishing my kids happy birthday. I'll make sure to pass that on to them later. Jesus and his Holy Mother try to get our attention. It's true. This is actually nothing new though. There have been accounts of Marian apparitions going back to like the times of the fathers of the church after the passing of Our Lady. They weren't, as apocalyptic as they are now, but they were very, very, very much going back all the way there. That's why I had actually heard that there had been in one of the ecumenical councils a challenge to the idea that you didn't have to believe in Marian apparitions. I couldn't figure out which one it was. And I'm glad you found it, actually, because it was something I wanted to present on a video at one point or another, but I never got around to it.
I could give you another relevant quote, Anthony.
Sure.
So, and this is from, we know with Father Ripker, when he did a spiritual theology series, he pulled almost directly out of Father Jordan Aumann from 1980. Okay. And when you look up his section on private revelation, this actually goes back. It's taken word for word from a pre-Vatican II manual. And this is from Father Antonio Marian. And the book is called The Theology of Christian Perfection, 1954. So it says, when you're looking at private revelations, it says, if after a prudent judgment, it's determined that a given revelation is authentic, like Fatima was, the one who has received the revelation should accept it in a spirit of faith. It's disputed among the theologians whether this act of faith is an act of divine faith. It seems to us that it is. Moreover, and here's the important part, moreover, if a private revelation contains a message for others, which it has been for us, and it has been accepted as an authentic revelation, as Fatima has been, those also have an obligation to accept the truth of the revelation and act upon it. That's huge. It says if a private revelation is approved by the church and it has a message for other people, that those people too have an obligation to accept the truth of the revelation and act on it. So it's saying this is something we need to do. Now, it doesn't mean you're not a Catholic if you don't do it, but it means you should do it.
That actually goes beyond even what Lateran V said, because then we can, we'll call them the apocalyptic Marian apparitions are covered by that. Every single one of them, of the approved ones, whether it was Quito or La Salette or Akita or Fatima, all of them, they're all covered by that, because those messages are not just for the seer, they're for everybody.
Right. And especially this, go back to that Father Howard Rafferty interview with Sister Lucia. She's telling us clear as day, there is something that we need to do. And then you compare that with Lateran V. I mean, that's a slam dunk in my mind. When people say, oh, I don't have to fulfill the Fatima message. Yeah, you really do. When your mother speaks, you have to listen. And we know from our own mother, when she asks us to do something, she's really telling us to do something. When you ask your kids to do something, hey, can you please make your bed? Are you really asking them, or are you telling them?
So I'm going to put a link in the chat here. People are asking about how to pray the little office. But first, for the question I put on the screen, those who are easily discouraged in hearing this, what are we to do? Don't get discouraged. Remember, our Lord wins. Your duty is to pray and fast and do acts of penance to improve your condition in life. And remember when I said that for the Sabbatine privilege, that second point of that chastity in accordance with your state in life is the hard part. I do tend to err on the side of mercy. You will hear me constantly rag on the overemphasis on mercy and at the expense of justice. But if you are working through prayer and keeping close to the sacraments to try to correct that part of your life, and let's say you end in a state of grace, but you still haven't gotten that sin under the in your past, I do believe that there will be mercy for you, more so.
Bay State Observer, I'd like to jump in on that. That's exactly what we're saying here, and that's exactly what Sister Lucia was telling Father Rafferty, that what you can do is do all 5 conditions of Our Lady of Fatima, which she revealed. And they could be easily remembered. Cross, CROSS, consecrate yourself to Mary, rosary daily, offer up your sufferings and daily duties, scapular, wear the brown scapular, and Saturdays, the first Saturday devotion. That's what you can do. And that's what we could spread. We need to spread that far and wide.
And this saying of the 5 first Saturdays, according to the church, only needs to be done once. Now, that doesn't mean only go to first Saturday Mass once. It means fulfill the 5 first Saturdays by going to Mass. I say a Mass dedicated to the first Saturdays. You'll know because it's usually advertised as such. I don't see too many Novus Ordo Masses offered, but they do exist that way. But you go do 5 consecutive first Saturdays. Typically, in my experience, the first Saturday Mass is offered in the morning. Typically, that's not always the case, but typically they are. And you go there, and then you observe the 5. You observe the requirements. And I've done videos on those in the past, and maybe I should do another one. Is there a resource? I've never seen an actual resource, but I did just put in the chat. If I didn't, I'll just put it there again. There's a link in the chat for the little office that'll take you right to Prime. That's the 6 a.m. hours roughly. And it's very straightforward. I mean, Prime, right of belief, but underneath it says this is what you pray Candle Mass to Advent. So that's most of the year. And this is according to the 1962 Roman calendar. This is the traditional Latin Mass calendar. And it just, in the introduction, you'll make the sign of the cross at the beginning. And, on that second response, it says, you'll either end it with Amen outside of Lent or Alleluia from Septuagesima to Holy Saturday. You'll end it with with that other thing there. And then I say the hymn because, I'm not a singer. I'm reminded of the St. Augustine quote where, he who sings well prays twice. I almost think because of how badly I sing, I'm like praying half. So I don't, I try not to inflict my voice that way on the world. But then afterward, you pray the psalm and you do you pray the antiphon. It goes really quick. Prime takes 3 minutes to pray it well. It takes 3 minutes. I'm not the one who I think could do really a guide on how to do that, to pray the little office properly. It's just I would much rather find a good priest who's who teaches these kinds of things on that. But it's really not that hard to do. Yeah, when my wife and I first started doing it, we had a few hiccups here and there. You know, it helps you get to know the liturgical calendar well. And we do the 1962. I have done the post conciliar one before, and I found the language to be just not very good. If there are any other questions in the chats, this is the time to ask. Lit office takes a full hour a day, split up at a full hour, give or take. Matins and laws will take up about almost half of that. It just, if you do them back to back, because it is just the largest amount of prayer. You do this in addition to the rosary. This is not a substitute for the rosary. Again, more prayer is not a bad thing. And when you do this, if you do the rosary plus matins and lauds together, plus prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline, that's 8 times 9 with the rosary. And if you're wearing the brown scapular, by the way, and you're enrolled, there is a actual enrollment. There's a morning offering prayer that goes with it. So 10. You're praying 10 times a day. Sounds like a lot. Add in 3 meals a day. That's 13 times a day. Again, sounds like a lot. Most of those prayers take 1 minute to do. 5 minutes each for those, for the little office. Again, it's called the little office. It's not as big as the Roman breviary. All right. Well, we should do this again sometime soon. So let me know, reach out to me if there is a topic you would absolutely like to cover. Maybe we'll do a special on how to do the 5 for Saturdays, especially with Advent coming. I think Advent's a wonderful time to start those kind of devotions, because if you start the 5 for Saturdays in Advent, so November, December, January, February, March, that'll take it right through most of Lent. And you might actually, if you time it, depending on how the calendar works this year, you might actually finish in time for Easter, which would be symbolically a wonderful thing. So maybe we'll have a conversation sometime in the next month or so about this. Anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. It is greatly appreciated. And share this if you want to on social media, since we're trying to spread the message of getting enrolled in the brown scapular. Here we are 3 months after the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Anyway, thanks for joining us today. It's greatly appreciated, Gene. You have any final thoughts you want to give to people?
Just again, don't let people tell you that you don't have to fulfill the message of Our Lady of Fatima, and that private revelation is merely a side thing, or it's not for everyone. The Fifth Lateran Council is saying that this is for everyone, and it should not be grouped in. It can't be grouped in with all other false miracles and all other false prophets. It's something that we have to listen to. Otherwise, we're harming the Holy Spirit. We're quenching the Spirit. We're suppressing prophecy, which God promised He would always send us. So do that. Don't lose hope. Our Lady is our life, our sweetness, and our hope. She gave us the battle plan, and that battle plan is cross. Consecrate yourself to Mary, rosary daily, offer up your sufferings, scapular, get invested and wear the scapular, and Saturdays, the first Saturday devotion. Above everything else, what Catholics need is a clear direction, a firm purpose, and an exact means of reaching that purpose. And that's exactly what the message of Our Lady of Fatima is all about. And that's how we're going to save the world.
And remember, Our Lady points us to her Son. That's the whole point. Anyway, thanks for joining us, everybody. God bless.
Ave Maria.